Objectifying women and religion. Many have pointed out how wrong it is to objectify women for sexual reasons because it devalues their God-given purposes. What many don't talk as much about is that not only is it wrong to objectify women for sexual reasons, it's wrong to do it for religious reasons. Many don't realize that the Bible actually speaks to this, at least in one place in particular, 2 Timothy 3, verse 6, which says that there are those, that is, false teachers and men who, in a predator-type way, sneak into or creep into households to capture weak women burdened by sins and led astray by various passions. They seek to objectify, use women, prey upon women for their own evil purposes, namely to create a false form of Christianity. And many women are susceptible to becoming prey for these men because they have not understood their God-given value and worth as women. And this really gets at the larger kind of cultural issue that we're in right now with the whole gender confusion and gender war that we see in our day. So many wondering, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? I mean, even this week, we have these executive orders that every Christian should be rejoicing in, that no, men and women's sports. I think there was one about the elimination of gay Pride Month. I mean, these are good pushbacks against the confusion and destructive ideologies that have been just running rampant in our culture, unchecked in the recent years. And but in the midst of this, I mean, our president goes and yesterday appoints a false teacher and prosperity preacher, Paula White, to be his White House faith leader of some task force to eradicate bias in Christianity. And you're just like, how could you pick a worse candidate for this job, more unqualified to do this? And it highlights the confusion surrounding Christianity and surrounding gender in our culture that still exists. And I mean, at a popular level, I heard, a panel discussion of a bunch of women, I don't remember a year or two ago. And I guess in whatever city this conference was happening, they went out in the streets before this conference and they asked a bunch of people just walking down the street, what is an example of a strong woman? And people were mentioning Hillary Clinton, Michelle Obama, Beyonce, Oprah. And they're like, why would you say those are strong women? And the answers were, well, she's got a successful career. She's powerful and independent. She has a lot of Instagram followers. And then the person asked, well, how do you know those are signs of feminine strength? To which they got basically blank stares because these women being interviewed didn't know what feminine strength was. And so much is happening on our political, at the cultural and political level regarding gender and Christianity. But what I want to say is that there's nothing new under the sun. That women have always been leveraged wrongly to promote Christianity, especially in its false forms. And so I want to highlight two fundamental ways that women have been leveraged wrongly to promote false forms of Christianity. And it's not even really about the two women I'm going to highlight, but I use them. I mean, they're significant, and these issues I'm going to talk about are significant, but think of these as patterns that are replicated in many forms and fashions with other women. And one of them we'll call an exegetical strategy. The other we'll call maybe a visual or aesthetic strategy. And so the exegetical strategy is usually used in contexts where people are more biblically literate, they're more educated. The visual or aesthetic strategy is used more where people are biblically illiterate or more uneducated. So before the Reformation, this one would have been more prevalent, and I'll get to it in a moment. But here's the exegetical strategy used to prey on women, and it goes back to what we'll call the cult of Artemis, which is a true cult in the ancient world, and many egalitarian and evangelical feminist scholars use this cult to justify their interpretations, their non-historical interpretations, their new feminist interpretations of specifically 1 Timothy, which is a very important passage. So, for example, let me read this. 1 Timothy 2, 11 to 14. Let a woman learn quietly with all submissiveness. I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. Rather, she is to remain quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. So what is the Pauline argument there? Women shouldn't teach or have authority over men. They should remain quiet in the church. Why? Because Adam was born first, was formed first, then Eve, and Eve was deceived, not the man. So he roots that one in the fall. Eve's deception first. It's the problem of the fall. The other is related to the created order. So that's why he argues women shouldn't do certain authoritative things in the church. Now, the egalitarian or the evangelical feminist will come along and say, well, no. Those verses, they only apply to the church in Ephesus. They aren't for us. So that's why we can have female pastors, because these are not for us at all. They were only for the Christians in Ephesus that Timothy's pastoring the church in Ephesus, and it's only for them because of this cult of Artemis. That's an all-female cult with all-female priestess, and that's what Paul's pushing against. Now, that might be a significant argument if it were true, as N.T. Wright and many other egalitarian scholars would propose. The problem is, when you look at, let's say, Surprised by Scripture, which is a book by N.T. Wright, that's quoted by all these, let's say in the last 10 years or so, all these egalitarian or evangelical feminist authors, they'll quote this book by N.T. Wright, where he makes these claims. So his claim in this book is then requoted and republished in all these articles and in all these books in the last 10 years. When he says this is an all-female cult, the cult of Artemis, and that women had this, it was an extremist feminist cult. He argues, and therefore Paul's just pushing back against this cult, and this is just a cultural issue, and this is not a teaching that is meant for the church today. That's the egalitarian argument. They're always coming up with new arguments why we shouldn't obey this particular passage in 1 Timothy 2. The problem is N.T. Wright, and you can go get the book and look at it, he doesn't give any footnotes. He doesn't give any sources. He doesn't give any historical or archaeological evidence. He doesn't give any historical proof to substantiate his claims that this is an all-female cult. And instead, what we find historically is that the cult of Artemis, it was a real cult in Ephesus, but there were not only female leaders in it. It was not an all-female cult. There were many men in this cult. I've got 3 names here. Priest of Artemis, named by Julius Atticus. Apollonius Politicus names another female cult leader, or male cult leader in this cult of Artemis. And Servilius Basinus was one under Augustus around the time of Jesus, who was named as being a part of this cult. This is all found in Women in the Church by Stanley Grenez. And then you can go back to the 2nd century. Achilles Tacitus wrote a romantic novel which has a female priest of Artemis. And then you have the Korites, which were a prominent cult in this same time with a male following. 44 AD, sources say these city leaders would essentially sell the male priesthood to the highest bidder, and you could become a priest in this cult. And many of the people who bought those positions were men. So we know there were men in this cult. These were not all female cults. This was not a feminist extremist cult, as the egalitarians seek to substantiate, which is the basis of their claim that Paul's just trying to write to the Christians in Ephesus to not have women teach or have authority because they're so influenced by this feminist cult. And he doesn't want that feminist cult to come in. And their whole argument is based off of that. Now, we have Bible as well that's relevant to this. And I want to just read a passage of scripture that's very relevant. Acts 19, starting in verse 20, we know that the word of God is multiplying and increasing. It says, and a man named Demetrius gets very mad. This is a man who's in Ephesus. He's a silversmith. He's a craftsman. And he gains his money by building little souvenirs, we could call them. But they were more than that because people would bow down to them. They were little false gods of Artemis. Shrines of Artemis, it calls them. Silver shrines of Artemis. In chapter 23 of Acts 19. And so he's mad because his sales are plummeting because of the spread of Christianity, and people are not worshiping Artemis, but they're worshiping Christ. And Artemis is interesting, and we need to know who Artemis is. She is a icon, a Greek goddess of the moon and protector of women. So she is a symbol of feminine power, feminine independence, resilient strength. Her story does resonate with the feminist ideals. She's a protector of women. She encourages them to embrace their uniqueness. She's a protector of women in childbearing, which is interesting. Sandra Galan, professor at Dallas Theological Seminary, wrote a recent book, Nobody's Mother is what it's called, Artemis of the Ephesians in Antiquity and in the New Testament. And she's drawing from all these older sources, not ancient, but, books in the last 40, 50 years on Artemis. And she says prostitution was illegal at this time in Ephesus. And all these numerous cults exercised their power by celibacy. Now that's interesting. I was thinking about this. I think this may be somewhat in the back of Paul's mind when he says women are saved through childbearing. So you have women who, in the culture in Ephesus, they're leveraging their power of their womb to not have babies, to not procreate, and so it's a power move to leverage their wombs and not have children and perpetuate their virginity and not get married. And Paul's saying to the women in Ephesus in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 16, I think it is, where he says the women will be saved through childbearing. And so he's saying you need to get married. You need to procreate and have babies and build families and obey the commands of God and raise your children in the ways of the Lord. This is the means to your salvation, is continuing in obedience to the Lord and his God-given role for you. So Artemis does challenge traditional gender roles. She is a symbol of the cycles of feminine life. In art, she's depicted immodestly, often with a bow and arrow, gold jewelry, braided hair. Does that sound familiar? 1 Peter 3:1 says, wives, do not adorn yourselves with external braiding of hair, the wearing of gold jewelry, or the clothing you wear. That's Artemis and other goddesses would dress like this. And Paul's going, you should not be like the culture, but dress modestly. Now back to Acts 19, verse 27. Demetrius goes, there is a danger that this trade of ours may come to disrepute, and that the temple of the great goddess Artemis may be counted as nothing, and she may be disposed of her magnificence, she whom all Asia and the world worship. Interesting. That you've got the temple of Artemis. I mean, you can go, the ancient ruins of this temple are still there in Ephesus to this day. It's one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. Largest building in the ancient Greek world, was 350 by 180 feet. It had 127 columns, 60 feet tall on these 127 columns. Solid marble. It was built and rebuilt numerous times and got bigger and bigger and bigger. Housed works of art. It had a bank in it because so much money came into this temple, and they would loan it out at interest. They would house refugees in this temple of Artemis, and so Christianity is getting into Ephesus, and it's breaking the temple. It's going broke, and all the business surrounding this. And so listen to verse 28. It says, when they heard that they were enraged and were crying out, great is Artemis of the Ephesians. Now some cried out one thing and another, and there was confusion. They didn't know what each other. They didn't even know why they had shown up at the riot. Sounds like the BLM riots from a few years ago. People didn't even know why they were in the streets yelling and burning things down. It's what's happening here. It says, for 2 hours they cried out with one voice, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." And it says the town clerk had quieted the crowd. He said, "Men of Ephesus, who is there who does not know that the city of Ephesus is a temple of the great Artemis, and of the sacred stone that fell from the sky? Seeing then that these things cannot be denied, you ought to be quiet and do nothing rash, for we have been brought these men here who have neither said," that's Paul and his companions, "and they're guilty of blasphemy," essentially blasphemy against the goddess. And so what you don't see, and here's what I'm trying to highlight, you don't see these strong feminist, extremist leaders. You don't see any women stepping forward. I mean, their whole cult that they lead would have been, and if they had all this power in the ancient world like the egalitarians say they did, they would have stepped forward. We would have seen them here. You see no mention of a woman. Instead, those with power invested in this cult of Artemis are Demetrius, the craftsman, and others with him, it says, who had a complaint. And then the courts are open, and their proconsuls, which again, those were led by men that had judicial authority over the cult of Artemis. And he says, "Let them bring charges against one another. If they seek anything further, it shall be settled in the regular assembly, for we're really in danger of being charged with rioting today, since there is no cause to give to justify this commotion." When he said these things, he dismissed the assembly. And so what does all this show? Here's what I think is clear. The cult of Artemis is not a feminist powerhouse of a movement of feminism in the ancient world like the egalitarians say it is. When it's shrinking in size as Christianity's moving in, these women, supposed strong women in this cult, aren't saying a word. We see no mention of them. We see only men. And when Paul addresses them, or when the clerk addresses them, he says, "Men of Ephesus." So he's speaking to all these men who are supposedly influencing the cult of Artemis, not women. But these men, I would say, for financial reasons and to build their powerful religion, are leveraging women for the sake of their selfish ends. They're objectifying women, in other words. So that's the first example, the cult of Artemis. Here's the second. We'll call this a visual strategy or an aesthetic strategy, and that's to use the Virgin Mary. Now, in pagan cultures, when the Catholic Church moves in and they begin to get the Catholic dogma in there, oftentimes the tribal deities or the goddesses in that pagan culture, Mary replaces them, becomes kind of the face of that paganism or that goddess, although she still keeps all her characteristics. And she's visually illustrated all over the world in all sorts of forms, from in cathedrals to in other religions. Syncretism just puts Mary's face everywhere, and she becomes whatever that tribal deity thought of their previous goddess. She just kind of replaces that. That's so often the case of what happens. Now, why the exaltation of Mary? Why is this so important? Well, I think it gets back to the ultimate feminist, the reason for feminism. We get, first wave feminism is just aiming for some voting rights for women, essentially, and then it gets more second, third, and fourth wave feminism. You're getting into issues of abortion and all sorts of LGBT gender issues, intersectionality, systemic injustice. All this stuff kind of gets brought in, and because women feel weak and powerless, that's the issue. And so they create a system, or they're willing to be used to create a system that's even wrong in order to be exalted. The tragedy in that is that Christianity exalts women. In every culture that Christianity enters into, women are exalted in the right ways. And no No worldview, no teaching, no religion has exalted women like Christianity has. I mean, Jesus, all the women that came in contact with Jesus are exalted in the right ways. They're platformed in the right ways. All these women who are first eyewitnesses of Jesus after his resurrection, all the women who followed him in his ministry, Jesus loved and ministered well to women and exalted them. We don't need to exalt them in wrong ways, as the Catholic Church has done with Mary. As the Mother of Heaven, she's called. She's called the Mother of Heaven and of the Church. One commentary, Catholic commentary on John 20, verse 27, or John 19, verse 27, that phrase where it says, "Behold your mother," and Jesus is on the cross speaking to his mother. It says, they make this exegetical leap where they say Jesus is giving Mary not to John, but to the whole church as a mother. And there's actually an actual story in the Middle East that's kind of been passed around, or not the Middle East, the Middle Ages. When Mary came into heaven, Jesus supposedly greets her and says, "Oh, I'm so glad you're here. Now I'm going to divide my kingdom with you. I will be king of righteousness, and you will be queen of mercy." And again, before the Reformation, these type, the Marian and dogma and Mariology just ran rampant because people didn't have a Bible to study and see these things for themselves. But there's a popular book actually called The Glory of Mary. It has 800 editions. Okay, now 8 editions is a lot for a book. 800 editions is unheard of. That's why this is the standard work of Mariology in the Catholic Church throughout hundreds of years. And it starts out, one portion gives this prayer, and it goes like this. I'll read a portion of this. "O Mother of perpetual help, thou art the dispenser of all the gifts which God grants to us miserable sinners. For this end he has made thee so powerful, so rich, so bountiful, in order that thou mayst help us in our misery. Thou art the advocate of the most wretched and abandoned sinners who have recourse to thee. Come to my aid, for I recommend myself to thee. Into thy hands I place my eternal salvation, and in thee I entrust my soul. Count me among thy most devout servants. Take me into thy protection." It goes on. And it says, "If thou wouldst protect me." Now, again, praying to Mary. This is a prayer that is to be prayed to Mary. "I fear nothing, not for my sins, because thou wilt obtain for me the pardon of them. Nor from the devils, for thou art more powerful than all of hell together. Nor even from Jesus, my judge, because by one prayer from hell, he will be appeased." So Jesus is the enemy of me, and Mary appeases him. It's utterly blasphemous. And it just goes on. I don't even want to read the rest of this. It ends with these 3 Hail Marys you're supposed to pray. Just utterly blasphemous. The objectifying of the Virgin Mary to leverage and to capture weak women and weak men, and to promote a type of religion that is false. That's all that's being done here. It's exactly like 2 Timothy chapter 3 verse 6 says that there will be those who creep into households and capture weak women. They have done that. And they've done that not only with women, but with certain iconic images of women and certain cults and religious systems where women were exalted in false ways, which is the tragedy. Because God does exalt women, and God glorifies women in all the right ways. And it is very tragic to see all of these false teachers who have exalted women in the wrong ways that ends up leading to utter destruction. And so women, you need to know who you are. You need to know how glorious God has made you in his image, and you need to be guarded and alert and aware of those who would seek to pervert femininity for their own selfish ends. I hope this is helpful. May the Lord give us all discernment. Blessings.